The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
And welcome to the third in the series, Considerations and Strategies for Running Clinical Trials During COVID-19 Pandemic. This is Shani Dyer, I'm the CEO of ARCS Australia, and this is the jurisdictional update for today. So we have a full house again, so welcome everyone. I haven't been mentioning this, but please use the hashtag to talk about the session. That we know the infection rate is flattening, but we're not out of the woods by any shot. So let's move on to the next slide, Joe. So we want to thank MTP Connect, who have very kindly come on board to sponsor this important series. MTP Connect, as you know, is the industry growth centre for our sector. They support us in a number of ways, and we really thank them for their support. On the next slide, again, for those who are new, you have the ability to sit and listen and participate. You must be a registered attendee and no recording is allowed. We will be recording the session. If we have any problems, we can make that recording available to you later. We will be having a Q&A at the end of the session, so you'll see down on your chat that you can put questions in and we will triage those and ask them later. Those questions that we don't get to, we'll put up on our website and deal with those later. Next slide. So whilst we're here giving you information about clinical trials and COVID-19, we do remind you to keep abreast of information through the health.gov.au website, and remind you that your physical and mental health is also important. So please keep that in check and see anybody if you need any other support. Next slide, please, Joe. So again, this is a series to talk about what's happening with clinical trials during this pandemic. Things are moving very quickly and changing very quickly, so communication on a regular basis we thought would be really, really important. And so we've divided up the series to cover off different stakeholders. But if things happen and we need to make updates, which we will be doing today, we will include those so that the information that we provide you is as up to date as possible. So today we're going to be hearing from the jurisdictions, but first we're going to hear from Rob Kent from the Kinghorn Cancer Centre based at St Vincent's Hospital. He has been giving a brief update from the first, well, a full update on the first part and a brief update last week as well, before we hear from our colleagues from the State Department, New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria and South Australia. The key message though for Australia, as we heard last week from the CCPRG and from our regulatory colleagues, was that we will continue clinical trials and endeavour to continue our work as long as it's safe for the patients, the clinical staff and the integrity of the data. And as we heard from folk last week, the regulatory bodies will be flexible as long as you keep those two principles in place. So again, thanks to MTP Connect, I would invite Rob Kent to give us a brief update right now.
Thanks, Shani.
I'll move through those slides. Yeah, move through those slides, Joe.
Oh, thanks, Shani.
Rob Kent.
Yep. So look, I'll just give you a quick update. During the last week, things have changed rapidly as usual. I've been in discussions with a few of the other managers in different sites in different states and hearing from their perspective what's going on. So the biggest issues we're facing is the hospital's preparation for a potential rapid redeployment and the stresses that's actually putting on the individual departments. At the Kinghorn Centre here, we've got our pandemic is being managed by the executive team, so it enables us to get some high-level decisions very rapidly. The treatment area is now moving to extend their working hours and their working days so they can have 3 complete teams on Monday to Wednesday, followed by another 12-hour shift team Thursday to Saturday. This will allow patients to be spread out, especially in the immune-compromised cohort. It's very important. But what that means for us is we're having to match that. So we're looking at having two research nurses in the clinical treatment area with a runner who will work there Monday to Friday and will not come up to the research area during that time. That will give them a 2-day washout period before the next team goes down. In the outpatients area, which is on a separate floor, we will also have another team of 3 people working exclusively in that area. They also will not come up to our level of the research, and we're delegating overall management to the team leaders who will guide the research on the levels and be in contact by phone. Other things we're seeing is we're trying. One of some of the issues we're seeing, we're trying to communicate to our partners that we are aiming to be 100% compliant with our protocols. We're hearing from many other sites who are looking at ways of cutting back on the requirements, trying to reduce workloads. We're of the opinion that this pandemic is going to damage the business significantly. The most important thing for us is to maintain 100% compliance and face individual deviations on a case-by-case basis. We had a big issue that happened during the week was this patient who was looking after his 85-year-old husband just refused to come to the clinic. So we had to rapidly implement a community research. We've gone through the document preparation and the screening and changing SOPs and pre-screening documents, preparing a mobile research kit in the last 3 days, and we're preparing to take our research out to the community to account for patients who are stable on disease, managed with tablets and low-impact medications that can be administered safely inside their own homes, following the New South Wales standards for community safety and staff safety. I've talked speaking to some of the other centres. Some of the biggest problem they're facing is they have lacked some autonomy in being able to source new staff to replace those who are being redeployed. They're looking at they're worried about future research income and how that will affect their staff and their future viability. So it's very important for that research is an active treatment, and we need to be able to support the departments who are going through this time so that we have a viable business once this is all over. So that's pretty much all I have. I will share any of my documents with Shani around the community nursing. One last thing we're doing is we've implemented scrubs. The hospital resources have been redeployed to the frontline area. So in the background, we're sourcing our own equipment to protect our patients and protect our staff. Thanks, Shani.
Thank you very much for that, Rob. Joe, if you could go back to slide 6. So as you can see, things are getting quite difficult for those at the front line, and I think again clearly we need to ensure that we look to the future after COVID and keep our research teams active. So again, for those who don't know us, ARCS is working for you. We're an individual member-based organisation, and at this very critical time, we're looking to do what we can to ensure that the information flow is clear, that you have access to people who can provide that information, and just as a resource that provides other activities that will help keep you informed and keep you well. If we go to the next slide, Joe, you can see that we had advertised previously an update from the Commission who are working on the governance framework. They will be talking about that tomorrow with an update around COVID-19 and the implications of that on the governance framework and the implications of that. As you know, the governance framework is important because it puts clinical trials up as a standard within the accreditation system for hospitals, and the concept that we maintain clinical trials as a viable option for people is going to be incredibly important, as we will hear from Bernadette tomorrow. On the next slide, we also have pulled together a concept of Share, Learn, Connect. This is is just to help our members and the stakeholders working in our sector, and more broadly, but to help people understand how they can help manage themselves, how they can remain engaged and connected. And I do recommend that you come on board and listen to this. We've pulled together some very interesting speakers who can help you make sense of the way you're feeling, your anxiety, and really help you keep sane in this disconnected, physically isolated world. We also are doing a number of other things that I can't fully share with you at the moment, but particularly around being able to resource clinical sites during this time. We'll be putting out a survey shortly, and I ask you to keep your eye on that, because it will be helping sites to bring on people who can fill in positions when those positions are taken elsewhere and used in a clinical setting. So that's going to be an important initiative. Go on to the next slide, please, Joe. Sorry, the next slide. So now I'll call upon our jurisdictional colleagues. We'll hear from 4 different states about their role in and response to COVID-19. I thank them for coming on and making the time. We have Anita Vandermeer from the Clinical Trials New South Wales. We have Roberta Lucia, who's the Clinical Trials Liaison Officer from Queensland Clinical Trials Coordination Unit. We have Suzanne Hasthorpe, who is the Manager of the Coordinating Office in Victoria, and is also the Chair of the National Mutual Acceptance, and Jessica Southwood, who is the Statewide Research Coordinator in South Australia. So each of these people will be giving us an update for about 10 minutes or less, if they can, to provide time for questions at the end of the session. So let's move on to Anita, and thank you, Anita. I'll hand over to you to do your presentation.
Thanks, Shani, and thanks to all of the ARCS team, who I know have been working incredibly hard over the recent period to ensure that we have really good communication and engagement across the sector, which is very critical at this time. For those of you who don't know me, I manage Clinical Trials New South Wales within the Office for Health and Medical Research in New South Wales Health. Today I'm going to highlight some of the elements of our clinical trials COVID-19 guidance. Thanks, Joe. So just by way of context, you were introduced last week to the Commonwealth National Statement on COVID and Clinical Trials. And this national statement was a joint effort by our Commonwealth Department of Health and all of our state and territory departments through the Clinical Trial Project Reference Group, along with the NHMRC and TGA. But I would say that we also liaised with Medicines Australia, MTAA, the R&D Task Force. And so this guidance really represents a collaboration of peak bodies and governments across the sector. Today I'm going to highlight the New South Wales specific guidance, which was released to deal with the issues that are occurring particularly in New South Wales. This is a set of directions and advice designed to provide a common approach for all of our local health districts and our sponsors to manage their active trials, the trials currently in the startup phase or planning, and specifically our COVID-19 related trials. It allows our LHDs and sites to develop their own individual responses according to local health conditions, but provides a common approach. Further this week, we will be providing some more detailed information to our LHDs on portfolio risk assessment and contingency planning. And next week, you will be hearing from my colleague, James Cockayne, to discuss the specific guidance for HREX and RGOs. Thanks, Joe. I would start by commenting that the COVID impact is being felt differently across all of our states and territories, and that's the prime reason why New South Wales has delivered a state-specific guidance which aligns with but builds on the national statement. In New South Wales, we have already seen significant healthcare reprioritisation and workforce redeployment, and this is necessarily affecting our clinical trial portfolio across the state differently to what you may see in other states and territories. Thanks, Jo. In terms of accessing the guidance that is available on our website, Medical Research New South Wales, at the top of the Clinical Trials New South Wales page, we will be updating the guidance periodically as the situation evolves. Thank you, Jo. So the guidance itself has a series of general principles which are really around minimising the adverse health impacts for our clinical trials participants, but as well as our staff, our site, sponsor and vendor staff, really everyone who's involved in clinical trials, as well as managing the burden and disruption to our health-related services in New South Wales, keeping in mind the comment that in this state we are already seeing significant workforce redeployment within some of our key local health districts. We are asking sponsors, sites and researchers to work together to consider the wider impact of COVID-19 on the clinical trials portfolio in this state, as well as the impact on our participants and our staff. Where possible, we are asking all new clinical trial arrangements to be managed prospectively, but keeping in mind that we have a new set of guidelines for ethics and research governance, which allows significant flexibility during this time. And that will be discussed in more detail in next week's webinar, but is available on the guidance document on our website. Thank you, Jo. For our active clinical trials, Clinical Trials New South Wales is advising our sponsors, sites and researchers to collaborate and communicate closely to consider the risk to participant safety. And this is in terms of continuing in a current clinical trial, but also potential risks associated with discontinuing a trial where there are no other treatment options. PI and study coordinator availability is an evolving issue, particularly in New South Wales, and it's important for sponsors to understand this in terms of their delegation of responsibility of their clinical trials. We're also asking sponsors to look at, and sites to look at changing the way they undertake participant visits. This can include a reduction in the frequency of participant visits where that's possible, to increase the visit windows. We're also working with a number of providers at the current time to identify facilities that could be used as satellite sites so that participant visits could still be conducted outside of the normal hospital setting. And if you are in an LHD at the moment and are looking for a potential satellite site, please get in contact. We can assist you with that, as well as other options such as hospital in the home visits, remote consultations, telephone calls, emails, etc. Thank you, Jo. There will also necessarily be changes to monitoring arrangements, and in the first instance, we're asking sponsors to look at the frequency of monitoring and to reduce the frequency of monitoring before then moving to remote monitoring. Again, focusing on ensuring there's no additional burden to our already significantly redeployed workforce. We obviously expect the quality of documentation practices at site and by sponsors to be maintained as best as possible. And if you are looking to establish a COVID-19 specific trial, while that must follow current TGA and NHMRC guidances, there is some additional information on both those organisations' websites, which provides some flexibility in starting up those types of trials. If you have a COVID-19 trial that you're trying to get up and running in New South Wales, please reach out to us. We can assist in fast-tracking that trial for you. Thank you, Jo. And lastly, on continuity of IP to participants, we ask everyone to please keep in mind that participant risks should be considered when looking at potentially stopping a trial or suspending a trial because of the safety related to abruptly interrupting study drug. If you wish to discuss this further, please reach out to us. Thank you, Jo. Next slide. For those clinical trials that are currently in the startup phase or planned for 2020, you may already be aware that a number of our LHDs have currently closed to new clinical trials and suspended their trial portfolio for all but essential and life-saving trials. We are asking sponsors and researchers to consider their planned trial portfolio for 2020. This does not mean that you need to stop your planned trial portfolio, but consider how you may approach that and allocate it according to current health system capacity and risk assessment. We'll happily work through that with you. If you need assistance, please reach out to us at Clinical Trials New South Wales at health.newsouthwales.gov.au. Thank you, Jo. And that's it for New South Wales.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anita. I think given that New South Wales has got the concentration of infections, it's good to hear from them first because they're addressing a number of the issues that are as a result of the infection rate and the fact that there is a fair amount of deployment of staff already is indicative of that position. So these slides will be available for people later, so the information on those slides can be found for you on the ARC's website. We have a dedicated COVID-19 page that has a whole range of I think, relevant and important information for you. So if we go on to our next speaker, we'll be hearing from Queensland and their response. So we have now Roberta Lucia. Roberta is the Clinical Trials Liaison Officer in Queensland and is replacing Melissa Hagan to present Queensland's position today. Thank you, Roberta.
Thank you. So first of all, thanks ARCS for giving us this opportunity to all to get together and keep each other as up to date as possible. As you said at the beginning, Shani, things change rapidly. So we really do rely on everybody's adaptability and response to flexibility to this response. So we're all in it together. Anita, I think those slides that you presented are an exact copy of what Queensland is doing. So our guidance document is just at the next level up for approval, and we're hoping to be issuing that later today. And pretty much addressing based on the same guidance documents that you mentioned and also the same kind of information. We've kept it very similar to those national guidelines so that everybody in every state is working on the same platform and to a similar set of guidelines. On another aspect that Queensland Health is doing is we're trying to do what we can to support clinical trial sites as well as service providers to the clinical research environment. And what we're doing is we've partnered up with ARCS to get a questionnaire out nationally, which will ask for volunteers to offer their time based on their skills. What Queensland Health is doing, we've partnered up with Life Sciences Queensland. We have a questionnaire that will be going out today as well, asking our clinical trial sites in Queensland, our service providers in Queensland, any national companies who have monitors residing in Queensland or monitors who need to work in Queensland to continue the monitoring of ongoing clinical trials, asking what kind of help they need. We then hope that the Life Sciences Queensland questionnaire can be matched up with the ARCS questionnaire so that people in Queensland who have specific skills can be matched up with the sites who require specific skills. And by doing this, we are hoping that we will be able to maintain business as usual at many of these clinical trial sites or service providers to the clinical research environment as much as possible. I believe both of those questionnaires will be going out today. But one of the other things I wanted to touch on is what we're doing in Queensland as well, is that a lot of people, there have been two specific avenues of MRFF grants that have been sent out, one of them with respiratory focus attached. I think those applications closed today, and the other arm, which is purely research, closes on Wednesday. And some of our Queensland community have approached Queensland Health to see if we can help them in rolling out a certain aspect of their grant application, which would be the clinical trials setup. So with the Queensland Clinical Trials Coordination Unit, we are offering we're working with these people, the successful grant applicants, to coordinate a central ethics approach and to assist in coordinating a central governance approach, as well as those who are looking for sites. Then we can put them in touch with sites who are looking to be involved in clinical trials. We do the reverse action. So we're coordinating many of those different aspects of setting up a trial and getting them started as quickly as possible in our sites. One of the benefits of that is the use of teletrials. So I'm not sure if everybody out there is fully aware of teletrials, but in a nutshell, it uses the hub and spoke approach, where we have a primary site who is the main contact point with the sponsor, and recruitment is one of the aspects where the teletrials provides a benefit, is that the primary site works with satellite sites, and those satellite sites can also recruit patients to the trial. Obviously, there is a set of SOPs that teletrials works under, and we are also here to offer assistance and guidance and support in rolling out teletrials. If there ever was a platform to roll teletrials out, it certainly is this one, where we need to have patients from all over the state eligible and have equity of eligibility or equity of access to any clinical research that's focused on COVID. Because not everybody is in Brisbane, and not every patient or every person who has tested HIV positive or who has been admitted to a hospital unit for the treatment and care of COVID-related illness will want to travel long distances. So with the teletrials, we can actually recruit as a satellite site the closest institution to where those patients live, and then those patients can be seen using telemedicine or telehealth facility, which is in every Queensland Health institution, to be a part of any COVID-related research. I don't know if you're going to take questions now, Shani, or if you're going to take them at the end of the webinar.
We'll probably take them at the end, Roberta, so thank you so much for that summary. Yeah, look, I think we can move on to the other speakers. That way we can manage the time better. So thank you for your presentation. It was very enlightening. Our next speaker is Suzanne Hesthorpe. Suzanne is the manager of the coordinating office at the Clinical Trials Research in Victoria, and she's going to give us an update on Victoria's position. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you, Shani, and thank you for the opportunity to join today. Victoria is following the national advice that has been coordinated through the Clinical Trial Project Reference Group, which has been alluded to by New South Wales earlier. And there's also industry communication as well. We have on our website, it's the Clinical Trials website in Victoria. You can Google that. If you go to the National User Acceptance page, then you will find the link for these documents there. And also we have links for all of our 21 hospitals across Victoria that are part of the clinical trials framework, and they have individual advice for each of their sites as well. So if you're thinking of looking for sites for trials or other purposes, then I would encourage you to go to that NMA page. Not all trials, of course, may be under NMA, but we thought that would be the most accessible page for this information. We've been working very closely with our 7 reviewing ethics committees under NMA, and they review for multi-site in Victoria as well as for the National Mutual Acceptance. They are providing expedited ethics reviews currently, all of them. They are considering other new trials apart from COVID trials, and they will accept applications, but they will also be prioritising. The other thing that they all have is information regarding a risk assessment and risk assessment guidelines on current trials for participants. So that information is individually available at each of our 7 reviewing ethics committees. They're also encouraging remote monitoring, and they are looking at specific COVID information on ethics and research governance on each of their web pages. So with that information, I think if you go to that site, you'll get a fairly good overview of the different hospitals, etc. We have a very devolved system in Victoria. We don't have a central control point from many aspects over health services, but we do work very closely with them, and they're all cooperating and working together with us. The other thing is that I would take up Roberta's point on the teletrials. The National Mutual Acceptance Group have agreed to generic SOPs for clinical trials and teletrials, and also associated guidance and a set of national principles. And that now is sitting with the Clinical Trial Project Reference Group. Once it's agreed there, then these documents will be adopted by jurisdictions, and it's more of a coordinated, cohesive approach in that work. Just as an example too, last week I was contacted as a patient enrolled in another state on a clinical trial, and now with that one site of an existing trial, there'll be a teletrial arm in that other state. So I certainly agree that teletrials are something that is very important under these circumstances. To give you a bit of a picture of the activity in Victoria, we have 4 trials and 23 medical research projects listed. Not all of them might be approved yet, but they're working through that. There are 3 multi-site trials and 1 single-site trial, which is good. It's interesting that there's only 1 sponsored trial at the moment. The rest of the trials are obviously investigator-initiated collaborative group. There are 3 projects that are approved under NMA, and there are 24 that are approved under state only. So the activity is growing every day steadily, and the ethics committees are working on expedited review. I heard last week that one application took 2 days to approve, so I think that's really great. We've been looking at clinical trial numbers in general and the trends there. There was really, probably up normal levels of clinical trials up to the end of March, and we'll be tracking to see what trial activity will look like from April onwards. There are a number of conversations going on in Victoria, and some of the concerns are really around investigator-initiated trials, looking at whether there's duplication and also how to prioritise. Equity of access is a very important consideration for Victoria. And I suppose that probably is it, except there's one encouraging piece of news I heard today, that Medicines Australia, TGA and the ACCC are working together so that industry can come together to identify stock shortages and address stock shortages for in general in hospitals and in their treatment. So I think I'll hand over to you, Annie.
Great, thanks very much, Suzanne. That was very, very concise and very helpful for everybody. And yes, I agree that the teletrial is going to be an important element to help us get through all of this, because it becomes something where the person isn't so far away, but at least it provides access to important trials for those patients. So our last speaker for today is Jessica Southwood. Jessica is the statewide research coordinator in SA Health, and she's going to give us a brief on where South Australia is at the moment. Thank you, Jessica.
Okay, thank you, Shani, and also thank you, ARCS, for the opportunity to speak at this webinar today. I'd like to give just a brief update about South Australia's position in relation to clinical trials and COVID-19, but it is very much similar to what you have already heard today. So South Australia is involved in discussions with the Commonwealth and the other jurisdictions through the Clinical Trials Project Reference Group, and we support the national guidance that has been released. At this stage, there is no plan to release a separate position statement for South Australia. Similar to what Suzanne mentioned in Victoria, in South Australia, we have a devolved system. So the clinical trials teams, they're working with their relevant local health network research officers to work through the impacts of COVID-19 on their trials. If you just go to the next slide, please. So as already mentioned a number of times today, the key messages and emphasis needs to be on the safety of participants, the safety of researchers, and the integrity of the clinical trial data. And next slide, please. So the 4 human research ethics committees that review and approve research projects within SA Health, they're continuing to operate remotely via teleconference. New research projects are being reviewed in accordance with the established submission deadlines and meeting dates. This includes studies that will not commence immediately following approval, and timelines are being negotiated for these studies. The committees that have expedited review processes are continuing these processes. In terms of current clinical trials, each study is being worked through on a case-by-case basis. Some research teams have been impacted with redeployment of staff into COVID-19 work. Many teams, including research office staff and clinical trials teams, are now working from home and using audio and video conferencing technology to run their projects. Some clinical trials teams have divided staff to have some working from home and some are still working on site. The clinical trial centre at one of our major hospitals was turned into a COVID-19 testing clinic, so they're working through a number of alternative locations to move clinical trials out of the hospital setting. Decisions regarding trial visits are being worked through on a case-by-case basis to determine whether visits can be conducted remotely using telehealth technology or relocating essential visits to another site to enable primary endpoint tests to still be collected. Risk assessments are being conducted, which focus on the safety of each participant and also ensuring staff safety and wellbeing is maintained. Recruitment to many trials has been paused. IMP has been shipped direct to study participants' homes wherever possible, and access to EMR for remote monitoring is the responsibility of each of the local health networks to approve what they think is reasonable. Researchers are encouraged to communicate regularly with the research office at their local health network to work through protocol amendments and deviations, and also keep in regular contact with industry sponsors and funding bodies as required. I've heard from a number of clinical trials teams who work on investigator-led studies. They've had to cancel all participants' visits as the risk is too high for the participants to attend hospital appointments. So they're using this opportunity to do some of the data cleaning and archiving work that is usually low on the priority list when they're busy with active trials and recruitment. So ethics and governance review for new studies concerning COVID-19 are being expedited as required. And I've heard that there are a number of research studies relating to COVID-19 that are seeking ethics and governance approval within SA Health. And there are also a number of other opportunities in the pipeline. That's all I have to say for now. I'll just mention that if anyone needs further clarification, to contact their local health network research office, or alternatively they can contact the Office for Research in the Department for Health and Wellbeing. And thank you for your time.
Great, thank you very much, Jessica. That was, I think, very, very pointed and very useful for everybody. So let's now open it up to questions from the audience. I will hand over to Sue, who's going to manage and read out some of the questions. If we don't get to all of your questions today, as I said, if there are key things that we need to address, we will make sure that they get put onto our website. So over to you, Sue.
Okay, thanks, Shani. The first question is this is not aimed at anyone in particular, but maybe someone has some thoughts around this. Do we actually know the number of COVID trials nationally?
Hi, this is Roberta from Queensland. I don't know about nationally, but I know Queensland Health is being sent emails by researchers throughout our state requesting some advice or some support or guidance on what to do. So we in Queensland Health have started to coordinate a central list, and that list is shared with the directors of research in all of our hospitals, who have a meeting every Monday, and that's disseminated to the research staff so that if there's a particular trial that a site wants to be involved in, then we put them in touch with the owner of the trial, and then they take it from there. And again, as I mentioned in my presentation, we assist in that connection and setting it up in that site.
I might build on that. It's Anita from New South Wales. The numbers are very fluid at the moment, but I believe there are 4 active trials currently nationally, but many more in startup. One of our LHDs, we have 15 in startup at the moment. So it's very fluid, and likewise, we have a central database of trials. I would encourage anyone in New South Wales who is looking to start a preclinical or clinical COVID-related trial to reach out to us so that the Office for Health and Medical Research can support the initiation of that study.
Suzanne here from Victoria. Yes, we monitor this through our IT platform. We also have information lines, and we are being contacted quite consistently especially with researchers who are not familiar with setting up research and maybe trials from the point of view of ethics applications and things like this. So we're taking them through and supporting them through the regulatory steps.
Yeah, that's pretty much what we're doing in Queensland too.
Thank you for that. I've got another question where Suzanne mentioned that there is an example of 2 days for expedited approval. Do we have any data for approval times for all the COVID trials?
Look, we can do that. We haven't gone in that direction yet because the actual trial numbers are small. There are only 4. So we will be tracking that. But I do believe the COVID ones are going through very quickly.
Yes, again, for New South Wales, it's averaging two days at the moment, but next week at the Ethics and Governance webinar might be a good opportunity to review those.
Thank you. We have another question. With the new satellite sites coming on board, how are sites and HREC handling these? Are we able to proceed with these sites without a clinical trial research agreement amendment being in place given the circumstances?
Yeah, that's a great question. For New South Wales, we are currently working through the process for that, including identifying potential facilities that can be used as satellite sites. If the person who has that question has a particular trial in New South Wales they wish to discuss in detail, they can contact us and we'll walk them through that process. But suffice to say, we are focusing on making this as simple and quick as possible.
Suzanne here. Look, the classical teletrials model that Queensland worked on was, in fact, for the teletrial site to have a subcontract. And I'm not sure in this particular case I was talking about, it is a trial that comes out of Victoria, but I'm pretty sure they would be using that subcontract.
Thank you. I guess there's another question about consent. There's a question about remote monitoring and patient consent. Sponsors are requiring consent form updates for remote consent wording as it's not in the current ICF. However, we're having the HREC saying that this is not a requirement as the remote de-identified data is mentioned in all consents. Can we have a national approach about how to handle this situation to ensure strain is not put on HRECs and sites but still meet sponsor requirements? Does anyone have any comments on that?
Yeah. I might speak to that one. This was raised to the CTPRG last week and an update is pending on the national guidance. And please correct me if I'm wrong, ladies, but changes to the PICF to allow remote monitoring will not be required. Suzanne, have I got that correct?
Yes, I'd confirm that.
Thank you.
There's a question about telehealth. For studies with telehealth, is it expected that this be in the informed consent, i.e. they're informed of video calls, etc.?
Hi, this is Roberta from Queensland. Yes, in our SOPs, there is one focusing on patient informed consent process using the telehealth platform. What was the exact question? Sorry, Sue, I've lost track.
It says for studies with telehealth, is it expected that this be in the informed consent, i.e. patients are informed of video calls, etc.?
Oh, yeah, that's right. So in the ethics application, there is mention that some or all of the visits will be performed using telehealth, and consequently that is also translated into, or transferred across to the informed consent, the patient information sheet. So when the patient's being consented, they are told about that. In fact, the consent might already be done via the telehealth platform anyway, if the site, the satellite site, has the capability and the experience and capacity to perform consents. There is also some recommendations in the informed consent SOP that gives some guidance to how the primary site, where the principal investigator is, and the satellite site, where the patient and an associate PI would be situated, as to how to do visual identification. So we suggest tick boxes along the lines of, I have seen the investigator's photographic ID and he is who he says he is, and likewise the investigator's informed consent will have a tick box that says, I've cited photographic evidence of the patient and they are, I confirm they are who they say they are. The consent process takes place via video conferencing, and then at the end there's other tick box suggestions that say we performed the informed consent process via the telehealth platform on such and such a date. And then again, if there's an electronic medical records between the two sites, then how you handle the documentation. If it's only paper, then there's recommendations in the SOP as to how to handle the paper informed consent process, so at least the consents are filed appropriately.
Roberta, a question is, where can people access these SOPs?
So they can go on to, I could send you the link and they could contact ARCS and you feel free to send them the link, or they can send me an email and I can send them the link. It's on the Queensland Health website, but not in a very obvious place. So I think sending the link to anybody would be the best thing, or maybe you could go onto the Queensland Health website and put in the search bar contact HIIRO space REG. When those answers pop up, I think it's the second link that says for researchers, and then in there you should see where the SOPs are. But again, it's not an easy process. So Sue, I can send you the link, or otherwise people can contact me directly.
Yeah, if you send us the link, Roberta, we can put it on our website, so that'd be great. Thank you. There was a question, has anybody had any experience with ICU patient studies and approval times by guardianship boards, etc.?
No, not to date, but if there's any specific follow-up, we're happy to take that. Sorry, Suzanne.
Yeah, I was just about to say the same, Roberta from Queensland. We currently have a trial that's going through QCAT, that's the Queensland Civil something or other Tribunal. God, it's terrible, I don't even know what it stands for. Civil and Administrative Tribunal. And we're just working our way through our first one now.
In Victoria, we have a fairly streamlined process. There is a new act, the Medical Decisions and Treatment Act. It's on our website. It's in the BSM, Victorian Specific Module guidelines. You'll get some information there. Basically, the only thing is if the person is unable to provide consent if they're in ICU, then the doctors have to make a reasonable effort to access their advanced care directive. If that's not possible, then it's through the similar situations operating in Victoria for quite some time that the doctors are able to go ahead, providing they fill out a particular form on the there's a Office of the Public Advocate, and lodge that with the Ethics Committee and the Public Advocate. And then there are, provisions that this can be extended for a period of time, etc. So there's really no change in Victoria. It's quite streamlined.
Okay, well, thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, yep.
Sorry, I was just going to finish off with the last question. Yes, Shani, there's one about remote monitoring. Are sponsors requesting redacted information to be put on the sponsor platform, or what mechanism is remote monitoring happening? And as mentioned, there is going to be an ARCS session as part of that Learn, Share, Connect on the 15th of April, specifically around remote monitoring, but I don't know if Anita, Suzanne, Jessica or Roberta have any comment on remote monitoring and redacted information.
So I'll pick that up for New South Wales, just to say that we're approaching that on an LHD by LHD basis. Access to the electronic medical records by sponsors is through the IT department of the LHD, and we would remind sponsors that specifically for New South Wales, please consider reducing the amount of monitoring required at the current time rather than asking for upload of redacted documents just because of the current workforce capacity issues. So where possible, if you can reduce the frequency and requirements of monitoring, that would be a recommended first step.
Yes, this is Roberta from Queensland. We would echo the sentiments of New South Wales. Also, what we are implementing in Queensland Health, we're looking at it, we're quite at advanced stages with the plan, is to have a resource hub in Queensland Health Office where a number of volunteers will be trained on access to the electronic medical records platform. They will be designated as authorities under the under the Queensland Health Board, Public Health Boards Act, to be granted access to these records. And when the monitor needs to do one of those essential visits, then they will come to the Queensland Health Office and will sit beside the designated person from Queensland Health and be granted access to the patients who are on that specific clinical trial only. The platform is such at the moment that we can't give everybody access, because once we give access to most of our electronic medical records, then they have access to every other patient in that institution. So that's the way that we're approaching it, to have this resource hub here in a central location, and a volunteer will sit beside the monitor to grant them access to only the records that they specifically require for that clinical trial, and that's how that will happen.
Okay, thank you very much, Roberta. And I think time's gotten away from us. I think it'd be good if we could wrap up now. I'd like to thank very much the panellists today for their insights and their openness in both their presentation and the way they've answered questions. The questions that were requiring further information, we will get those together and get a response to those as well. Thank you all for listening in today. I will draw your attention to the next in the series, which will be on the 20th of April, because this week we have Easter upon us. So we will be pausing the weekly next week due to Easter. I will wish you all a very happy virtual Easter as you all celebrate quietly in your own homes, away from everybody but your close family. Difficult times indeed, when normally Easter is such a close time. So our speakers next week will be, as was said, around ethics and governance. We will have Collis Boston from Belbury, James Cocaine from New South Wales, and Tam Ewan from Victoria. As already confirmed, there's a couple of other speakers, but they will be confirmed later. But we welcome you to that session, which I think will be very, very useful. Thank you to all. Thank you very much for your time. I'll call it a close.
Thank you. Happy Easter to you too.
Happy Easter.